you. Welcome, everyone. I see we have about 30 participants. Numbers are going up as I speak, so that's wonderful. I'm just going to quickly introduce myself. I'm the curator at the Ermitinger-Clergue National Historic Site in Sault Ste. Marie. And also I am on the OMA Council and the Professional Development Committee. So welcome to conference. I just want to make some notes to everybody that we're hoping you can see the slides that we're on right now and hear the panelists. If you have questions about that, please put it in the chat box, and that our technicians behind the scenes at the OMA office will help you. Also, if you'd like to put in a question to our panelists, please use the Q&A button and icon. If you want to just say hello to us all or to somebody else, put it in the chat. We do have closed captioning available. You just have to click on the CC button to receive that. So if there is technical questions, please don't hesitate to let us know. So I'd like to introduce our panelists, and the subject of our session that is now mold in the collections and artifact move and planning. And I'm going to start by introducing Andrea. Andrea Carswell is the collection specialist at the Peel Art Gallery, Museum and Archives. She has over a decade of experience working on cultural heritage field in the cultural and heritage field, and specializes in working with archaeological collections, as well as the conservation and preservation of mixed material in the collection. Also joining us today is Emily Ricketts, who's head of conservation and collections at Museum Pros Art Services, Inc. Since joining in 2018, Emily has worked to integrate conservation practices, principles, and projects into the company's well-established art services departments. There is a full bio on each of them in the conference portal and on the OMA website. So welcome, ladies, and I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm going to monitor the Q&A for us. You can begin.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andrea Carswell. I am the collection specialist for the Peel Art Gallery, Museum and Archives, also known as PAMA. I would like to begin by acknowledging the land on which I work within the region of Peel and where PAMA operates. The region of Peel is situated on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, as well as the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, and the Haudenosaunee peoples. PAMA exists within the bounds of the adjacent Treaty Number 19, agreed upon by the Mississaugas of the Credit and the British Crown in 1818. This area has been home to countless Indigenous peoples since time immemorial, and today is home to many First Nation, Métis, Inuit, and other global Indigenous people. PAMA is grateful to the original stewards of this land and gives respect to its first inhabitants, as well as pays tribute to their legacy and the legacy of all First Peoples of Canada. The Peel Art Gallery, Museum and Archives is committed to strengthening its relationship with Indigenous communities.
Hi everyone, I'm Emily Ricketts and I'm the Head of Conservation and Collections Care at Museum Pros Art Services, Inc. I would like to acknowledge that Toronto, where Museum Pros is located and a portion of this project is taking place, is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Now I'm going to hand it over to Andrea to get us started.
To provide some context, PAMA's museum collection is stored at ground level, enveloped by two larger historic stone walls and two smaller walls as a result of a more recently constructed addition. In 2019, mold was discovered growing on artifacts by staff performing an inventory. A consultant conservator was then hired to assess the extent of the mold growth. The report identified mold within the collection on various artifacts and stated that the environmental reading chart showed that the relative humidity in the museum storage ranged from 60 to 85% throughout the month of August 2019, with 13 days higher than 75%. The charts also showed that the relative humidity was 75% or greater for 11 days in September 2018 and for 3 days in October 2018. The report made various recommendations, including the installation of dehumidifiers to prevent the mold from worsening. Dehumidifiers were later installed, however, the mold continued to increase because the dehumidifiers could not keep up with the demand. Staff found that the mold became more widespread on a large quantity of various objects across the entire storage area and on various housings without restriction. A specialized mold testing company was then brought in to establish the hazardous level of the mold. Through 2 testing events, tape lifting samples were taken off of the walls, floors, shelving, ceiling, HVAC diffuser, and a carefully selected artifact. All samples came back positive with varying degrees of severity and identified fungal species. It was then recommended that everything in museum storage be cleaned, disinfected, or replaced. As a result, out of an abundance of caution and for simplicity, the museum moved forward with the approach that every object within the collection should be considered impacted or exposed to the mold, even if it was not obvious to the naked eye. PAMA contracted 2 staff persons to perform abatement work on site beginning in early 2020. This required the museum to set up a self-contained workroom that could handle the needs of abatement work and prevent the mold from spreading beyond the affected storage area. This included shutting off HVAC in the workspace and storage to prevent mold from spreading through the HVAC system into other areas of the museum. Work started at PAMA, however, the onset of the pandemic caused the team to face many challenges in being able to complete their work. In late 2020, PAMA was informed that they would receive funding for a major renovation of the storage and collections workspaces, which included HVAC upgrades. I began at PAMA in February 2021 and was very happy to hear about this renovation work and the opportunities it was going to provide for the long-term preservation of the collection. However, due to budgetary planning and constraints, we were informed that construction needed to begin as soon as possible, and therefore the entire collection needed to move off-site in just a few months. To ensure we could meet this deadline, it was decided that the museum needed help. PAMA opted to bring in an external company to help move, store, and abate the entire affected collection off-site. This required developing a request for proposal to be publicly posted. While waiting for the RFP process to be completed, internal abatement work was halted and the team was redirected to focus on packing and moving the affected collection. From the onset of the project, we identified our main goals that helped guide our processes and decision-making throughout the project. We first wanted to gather a strong team with specialized skill sets that were able to complete the work efficiently, effectively, worked well under pressure, and had experience working with mixed material collections. We also wanted to pack effectively and quickly while ensuring the safety of the collection and the team. We needed to be able to track all object movements as quickly as possible. We also wanted to work with an external company that could perform artifact safe transport to and from PAMA and had proven experience in performing treatments on mixed material collections. We also wanted the external company to have a Class A facility that could safely store and manage the objects for the duration of the project. Safe storage included proper insurance coverage, good security measures, good object tracking abilities, and proper environmental monitoring. We aim to move the affected collection off-site as quickly as possible while also being cost-effective. These 2 goals had the largest impact on our decision-making process throughout the project and were sometimes in conflict, At times, we needed to spend more to move faster, such as ordering specialized supplies that allowed us to pack more efficiently. Lastly, we wanted to receive wholesome documentation of the objects, their treatment, and other elements that could help us achieve other long-term goals for the collection. We also required comprehensive project status reports that could be shared with necessary stakeholders. Emily will be sharing an example of these a little later. One of the most important things we needed to accomplish before we could really begin this project was communicating with all persons impacted to help them understand what has happened and what was needed to correct it. Most importantly, we needed to gain overwhelming support for the project. Without support, a project of this scale would be unachievable. From the onset of the project, all PAMA staff were made aware and provided updates through monthly staff meetings and other communications where required. The project impacted all staff, including curatorial, who would have limited access to the collections throughout the duration of the project, our building operations and visitor experience staff, who work closely with the team to ensure facility resources, building spaces, building access, and security clearances were provided as needed. Education and programming, who generously loaned us their spaces to use for processing and storing equipment. The art gallery team, who loaned us their skilled staff to help in the move. And all other departments, as we utilized their resources to help us throughout the project. This project was multifaceted and required support from all teams in various and sometimes unpredictable ways that required regular communications, staff adaptation, and support. Our primary stakeholders are the Region of Peel Council, various levels of management, PAMA's board and collections committee, as well as our community members. Communications to these stakeholders included publicly available reports to council, information around the HVAC project on PAMA's website, as well as regular updates at PAMA's board and collection committee meetings. In gaining the support we needed, we were able to receive funding from the Region of Peel for supplies, staffing, and the hiring of external contractors. Once we received our support and funding, we needed to quickly begin the planning process and secure our needed resources. Health and safety was our first priority. Given the large presence of mold, we needed to ensure that all staff were trained in mold safety measures and protocols. We also needed to secure related safety supplies. This included the team wearing Tyvek suits and properly fitted respirators. These supplies were difficult to obtain during the pandemic, so throughout the project we had 2 staff persons assigned to be responsible for monitoring and ordering these supplies. We also had to address working in the summer months. The HVAC had to be turned off in order to prevent the spread of molds, so we ended up working in indoor temperatures averaging around 30 degrees Celsius. Tyvek suits increase your body temperature, and being indoors meant we had no natural breeze. We checked in with our health and safety team for guidance on heat stress policies, ensured the team knew their rights, plugged in as many fans as possible, took regular water and ice cream breaks, had access to ice packs, and checked in with each other regularly to ensure everyone was feeling well. Next, we needed to secure and prep our workspaces. We needed to consider where we pack the affected items to ensure mold remained contained and dormant, where we would sanitize the exterior of the sealed housings to ensure mold spores did not get carried out of the contained areas. Once they were packed and sealed, where would they go that was secure until they could be picked up by an external company? And lastly, where would our excess packing supplies be stored? Securing the workspaces, including assessing our walking paths, doorways, and security measures to ensure we could transport the items easily and safely on site and into the transport truck when ready for pickup. We are fortunate that the temporary shutdown of the museum to the public due to COVID played in our favor. It allowed us access to spaces that we would not have had otherwise. We were able to utilize various classrooms and emptied exhibition spaces. Having swing spaces during a project like this is vital. Next, we needed to secure staff. We pulled all available curatorial and collection staff from the museum and art gallery, as well as extended museum staff contracts. One limitation we had with staffing was space. We could only fit so many staff into our packing areas and were therefore limited on how many could be working at one time. We also utilized a pre-existing limited contract we had with Stellar Art Services to help pack the collection while we were waiting for the RFP process to be completed and the contract be awarded. This gave us a boost in packing objects that required more complex packing and custom crating methods. We next had some brainstorming meetings to strategize our approach, establish procedures, and ensure all staff knew what to do and were prepared. Once we established our packing procedures, we were able to identify the supplies we needed and ordered accordingly. At this time, we were unsure how long the items were going to be stored for until they were fully abated. Therefore, our goal was to utilize archival grade packing supplies such as unbuffered tissue and polyethylene bags for materials that would be in direct contact with the objects, and then utilized more accessible and affordable packing materials for the exterior housings with the understanding that overall they would be temporary. We also ensured that most of our packing supplies could be delivered within 24 hours or within a couple of days. This was the more cost effective as we ordered what we needed when we needed it, rather than stockpiling and risking waste. We also had space restrictions for supply storage, and during the move, packing supplies can disappear quickly and vary depending on the day. It is incredibly effective to source a supplier that can deliver quickly and have the same supplies in stock regularly. Once the RFP process was complete, Museum Pros was awarded the contract. The urgency of the project resulted in us performing a more emergency style of packing and tracking. We set up our spaces and workflow like an assembly line. The first group would go into storage and retrieve the artifacts for packing. Once they retrieved the artifacts, the team would then create labels and quickly photograph them. Then the objects were moved to the packing area where they would be packed and sealed for transport. Once the packing area was full of the sealed objects, they were then briefly taken outside and sprayed down with an isopropyl alcohol solution to kill all the mold spores that could be carried on the housings to other unaffected spaces. They would then be transported to our temporary storage space until we were able to arrange for a pickup. Our main packing method was nest packing. This was more efficient and allowed for multiple objects to be stored in large polyethylene and polypropylene totes. Each tote could handle hundreds of pounds of stacking weight, which meant that more could be packed going up rather than out, which made transporting on skids more efficient and easier, as well as it reduced our storage costs on the other end, because many storage facilities do charge by the square foot. These totes could also be washed of all mold spores and reused for the return of the collection. Overall, totes are more costly than paper-based boxes. However, once paper-based boxes encounter mold, they need to be disposed of, and they also cannot be stacked as high. The tote's strength also meant that they are better at protecting from physical forces during transport. Also, in the long run, we found that they were more cost effective because there's a possibility that we could also resell them once they were no longer needed. We also wrapped all objects in 6mm polyethylene to seal the mold spores in with the artifacts and prevent their spread for when they left the contained packing area. This could include sealable bags or rolls of polyethylene. We utilized labels that included accession numbers, object names, material notes, as we initially aimed to pack the like materials with like materials, and condition notes to help the packers and unpackers on the other end know what to be aware of when packing and unpacking, such as loose parts. We then duplicated those labels. One we attached to the exterior of the wrapped object, and the second we attached to the exterior crate or tote so that the contents would be visible on the exterior. We found out early in the process that we did not have time to track object movements in our database. This would have significantly slowed the process. Therefore, we used photographs to document the containers and their contents so that later we could cross-reference them with our records. So as you can see here, this is sort of the initial stage once they come out of storage, where you can see the labels were printed and duplicated. These are the polyethylene bags showing that the objects are wrapped in tissue inside, and then they also have their labels put on the outside. Then here you can see the totes also have the duplicated labels put on the exterior, and this is where we would photograph so that later we could cross-reference exactly which objects were in which totes. Over here is also just an example of the objects and the photos that we would do. They were very quick just to move things along, but they allowed us to track and also kind of get a brief image of what the condition was at the time of packing. From the onset, we ensured that all team members were knowledgeable in each station's process so that they could provide support or switch roles at any time. This ensured that staff could be deployed to help at any station that had a backlog or cover someone if they were unable to work that day or change tasks at any given time to give staff a variety of experiences and to help prevent burnout, especially as packing can be very physically demanding. During the move, we also uncovered a lot of untracked and unaccessioned objects, or objects with illegible numbers. The museum had a previously established Microsoft Excel inventory to track unaccessioned objects. We utilized this system of numbering and recording because it was faster than developing a new method or using our database. It also ensured that data was consistent with already established procedures. These objects were then provided with temporary labels so that they could be accurately tracked throughout the entire packing and abatement process. We also took the time to mark objects viable for deaccession with colored tags. Due to time constraints, we only focused on deaccessioning objects that were in such poor condition and/or extremely hazardous that it was not feasible for abatement, justifiable for retention, or viable for transfer and auction. These items went through our deaccessioning process and were later disposed of. We began working with Museum Pros in the spring of 2021 to work out the details of the move and abatement work, including documentation and reporting strategies.
From the beginning, we understood that a major asset Museum Pros brought to this effort was a specialized perspective on artwork and artifact handling on a commercial scale. A core element of the Museum Pros Art Services business is the safe transport of all different types of artistic and heritage materials. As such, our staff is highly experienced with packing artwork, which includes a comfort with rapid risk assessment of objects to determine the safest and most effective method for loading and transporting in a truck or another commercial vehicle. This was a valuable perspective at the time that we joined the project, as we were able to provide insight and reassurance for how to speed up the packing phase to meet approaching deadlines. After completing our initial assessment and understanding the intending packing strategy that Andrea just described, all parties agreed that some changes to execution had to be made to speed up the effort. Through open lines of communication with PAMA staff, Museum Pros was able to offer the following adjustments to the existing packing protocols to improve overall efficiency. One of the key advantages the Museum Pros team brought to the process was the knowledge that the contracted scope of work for this project would be entirely handled by the company's full-time staff. We knew that the same crew would be wrapping on location at the museum, packing the skids, loading the truck, transporting the collection, unloading, and storing the artifacts. Because of this entirely in-house service, we could be strategic with the time and resources spent on preparing the artifacts to leave the facility. At a minimum, all objects had to be protected to allow for the wrapping and sanitation process previously described by Andrea, but we found that we could eliminate some of the more custom packaging such as skeleton crates, which had been prioritized earlier in the process. In a complement to this effort, during early site visits to PAMA storage, oversized, particularly heavy, awkward, and/or fragile items were assessed and flagged to be handled and packed by Museum Pros art handlers, who were best equipped to safely carry and wrap in preparation to load on the truck. At this phase, we also knew that the abatement of the artifacts would be handled internally by the Museum Pros conservation team. This alleviated the tracking pressure from PAMA staff, as we had planned and budgeted for the mold remediation phase of the project to include a condition assessment and inventorying for each individual object. The conservation phase of the project would not be under the same amount of time pressure, so it was determined that the outgoing tracking of the artifacts could be reduced, and the Museum Pros team would pick up on documentation, photographing, and labeling the artifacts through the remediation process. So you can see some examples of the stages of packing here. So on the left, we have an example of a skid with totes from the early phases of packing. So you can see these were packed by PAMA, and they have the PAMA labels that include the accession number, the name of the object, general condition notes as Andrea described. And then on the center, we have a skid of totes after the tracking process at PAMA was stopped. As described, we knew that we were going to be able to pick up the tracking through the conservation effort, so to speed up the process, all tracking efforts at PAMA at this stage were ended, and the totes were just labeled with a single tote number. On the right, you can see examples of labeled packed totes after abatement at Museum Pros. The original tracking strategy described by Andrea was carried out after the objects were cleaned, including labeling on the outside of the object packing and the outside of the totes, as you can see here. An additional layer of organization was added by packing the treated artifacts by threshold of mold abatement, which I'll explain a bit more in detail in a bit. This is a particularly well-packed tote. You can see all of the object labels on the outside of it here. Through these adjustments, the execution of the project goals were not neglected, but rather rearranged so that the intent and outcomes of the effort remained unchanged. As previously mentioned, one of the in-house services provided by Museum Pros was transportation of the collection from the museum in Brampton to our storage facility in Toronto. Our project manager worked with our art technicians, who were on the ground packing at PAMA, our warehouse manager, and collections manager to develop a strategy for efficiently staging, loading, transporting, and safely stowing the collection in our storage facility. The packed totes were stacked and shrink-wrapped skids, which were assigned a number for location tracking by the collections manager upon entry into the Museum Pro storage. All items leaving PAMA were labeled with sequential numbers for this purpose. The collection was transported on a climatic air ride truck. To reduce risks associated with frequent trips and double handling, Museum Pros trucks were only sent when a full load was staged and ready for transport. The team began by loading skidded totes and artifacts, as the finite dimensions allowed them to be easily and efficiently packed onto existing shelving in the designated project vault. And you can see that getting started in the middle picture there. Sea bins, skeleton crates, and individually wrapped large items were brought later to fill the remaining space in the vault to capacity. Rather than waiting until wrapping was complete, the transportation phase occurred simultaneously with the packing of the artifacts to allow for inevitable delays in transport. For example, due to the design of the museum grounds, the collection had to be brought outside to load onto a truck. As such, unsatisfactory weather conditions, such as rain or heavy wind, delayed scheduled pickups. This possibility was communicated early on in the project and was accounted for in transport planning. After joining the project in mid-April, the entire PAMA Heritage Collection was packed, transported, and stored at Museum Pros 12 weeks later, at the beginning of July. The emphasis on communication extended beyond the packing and transportation phase. The combined effort to achieve project goals continued with the development of project treatment protocol and documentation. The key element of this process was evolving the existing PAMA project condition report. Museum Pros management and conservators worked with PAMA collection staff to expand the details included on the condition report so that the details they were experiencing and handling each object in person would be effectively cataloged and recorded into the museum's permanent record. Terminology from PAMA's collections management system, MANISIS, was integrated into the new template. This included categorizing each object by priority class to assist PAMA with allocating resources for future conservation treatment upon the collection's return to the museum. The efficacy of the mold abatement is also described succinctly as a threshold designation to help determine future storage and handling protocols in the new museum storage space. The measurement of acceptable threshold for abatement efficiency is based on terminology published by the Canadian Conservation Consortium in Ottawa. It has proven essential as a consistent language to use when describing the extent and method of abatement treatment and, as such, the overall mold reduction on each object. The threshold level then informed the wrapping approach, how totes were packed for return to the museum, and will ultimately contribute to the museum's approach to unpacking and rehousing the collection in their new long-term storage. Once the final template of the project condition report was approved, it was recreated in a format that allowed for simple digitization and data extraction. This kept the workflow of the conservation team as efficient as possible and allowed for the creation of a complete collections data set from which key data points would be extracted and aggregated in a key performance indicator or KPI dashboard. The development of the Key Performance Indicator, or KPI dashboard, allowed museum pros to efficiently communicate project progress and milestones to PAMA staff and other stakeholders at the region of Peel. It was designed to highlight the dense project data and track project milestones in an accessible way, while giving museum staff detailed information they needed to begin planning for the return of the collection. So you can see here at the top banner, this is our general progress update for percentage and quantity of the collection abated, but then we have other features including the percentage of the objects and their condition status, their priority class status, and their mold abatement level as I previously described. And then you can get into some more nitty-gritty numbers about the percentage of materials in the collection, which of course we are noting as we process each object. The dashboard is a culmination of a huge effort by the Museum Pros conservators to treat thousands of artifacts effectively, safely, and efficiently. Looking back on the collaborative effort that went into the early execution of this project, we wanted to put all of the details and steps we just described into context. Here's a project timeline of the milestones. The boxes highlighted in yellow represent the shift in the project approach to work with a specialized external company. It was only through the tremendous effort and care of all involved that this project, which would normally and understandably take an institution years to plan and execute, was completed in just 6 months. Similarly, the shift to have a private industry conservation team dedicated to working full-time on the remediation effort meant the entire collection could be treated safely and returned to the museum as quickly as possible. The entire collection, estimated to be comprised of about 14,000 artifacts, will be abated and returned to the museum in early 2023, a little less than 2 years after Museum Pros was brought onto the project.
We learned a lot throughout this project and thought we would share some of our key takeaways that may be helpful to others. It is vital to perform regular check-ins with your team on how they are doing and what they need to accomplish the work effectively and efficiently. Since this project moved quickly and every day brought on new challenges such as locating unaccessioned items, approaching complex object packing, identifying things that may be hazardous, solving equipment troubles, etc., check-ins with the team were daily and in the beginning often involved problem solving and establishing new approaches to various aspects of the project as more challenges were uncovered. These check-ins also allowed the team to be consistently updated about useful and relevant information that impacted their day-to-day tasks. We also found that it was important that all staff, not just the project lead, communicate regularly. This is to ensure that if procedures change, that documentation and other processes are consistent and that all staff are able to pick up where someone left off at any given time. It's also important to know that anything can happen. No matter how prepared you think you are, you can never be prepared for everything ahead of time and often need to make quick decisions in the moment. Being adaptable and having a team that is adaptable is incredibly important to a project where things can change quickly. During a strenuous project like this one, it is important to be cognizant wherever possible of team morale. Anything you can think of, no matter how small, that can help make the team make the best of a challenging situation is worth the time and can help prevent burnout. When staff are burnt out, they are more likely to make errors with their safety and the safety of the collection. This could include regular breaks with refreshments, playing music, switching up team members' roles, and avoiding overtime wherever possible. Photographs say 1,000 words. Document everything you can think of with photos. Objects, work in progress, before and after photos of the spaces, anything. These photos will be vital in documenting your work. In such an urgent situation, there's not as much time as you would like to make traditional notes. Photos can help fill in the knowledge gaps and complement the notes you do manage to take during the process. What you think you will remember in the moment may not be as easily remembered later. Know that requests for proposals take time. Account for this time in your timeline. They take time to develop, time for a vendor to submit, time to review, time to finalize decisions, ask questions, and gain the necessary approvals. Depending on your organization, this can take many months. Check in frequently with the vendor about the budget. These updates ensure that the budget is on track and allows you to make strategic decisions, if required, to keep it on track. Lastly, if feasible within your institution, prioritize physical control of your collection as soon as possible, if not already done. In an emergency or large move, you need to have a strong sense of your collection size and needs.
Physical control of the collection is not only important when determining the scope of a project for internal purposes, but I cannot stress enough how essential it is for project and budget planning for the external contractor. When developing the conservation plan for this project, for example, the timeline, the materials we would need, the staff, and the budget was completely informed by my estimate on the average time to process a single object, which was then multiplied by PAMA's artifact count estimate. From our combined experience, we feel confident in advising you that if you do not have a full sense of the volume of your collection, which is a very understandable predicament for any institution, to err on the side of caution. When possible, it is better to estimate high and have room in a budget for contingencies than to not have enough. On a related note, another takeaway we want to emphasize was to keep an eye out for silver linings. In an emergency scenario, it can be easy to dwell on the negatives and the if-onlys that would have prevented a catastrophic event. These are, of course, important lessons to be learned, but there can be positive outcomes too. In this case, a benefit to the extent of the mold contamination and the decision to abate the entire collection is the creation of a completely comprehensive collections assessment and inventory of every object in the PAMA collection, from the smallest watch cog to the largest piece of farming equipment. The positive impact this will have on the long-term preservation of the collection, as well as the benefit to other museum departments, is immeasurable. The final message we want to leave you with is one we have tried to emphasize throughout this presentation, that a project of this scale takes all kinds of help. It is important for everyone to remember that everyone on the team, both from a public institution, a private company, and everywhere in between, brings a diverse set of skills, experiences, and expertise. It is important to respect one another, listen and learn from one another, and collaborate when facing new challenges. No matter how difficult or complex things get, everyone is striving to achieve the same goal, and the only way to make that happen is together.
I just wanted to take a moment to thank all the incredible hardworking packing staff who helped us achieve our goals through sheer determination, collaboration, and sweat. I also wanted to thank the wider PAMA team for their support, Museum Pros, and Stellar Art Services for their incredible packing and transport skills, as well as the Region of Peel for supporting this project and allowing it to happen. Thank you.
A special thank you to the fabulous members of the Museum Pros Conservation Team, Olivia Claridge, Candace Snodden, Haley Hollingshead, Lavina Lee, Jessica Benjack, Sandrine Blay, and Rain Poisson for their unbelievable dedication to this project. I also want to thank Museum Pro's owner, Matt Mahar, and my colleagues Andrew Medland and Tammy Law, and all of the Museum Pro staff for their contributions to this enormous effort. Thank you for your time, and we are looking forward to your questions.
Okay, my video's off, but I just wanted to, first of all, wow, what a huge multifaceted project. I couldn't even imagine. The collaboration, as you said, estimating, one of the takeaways was estimating high on the extent of your collection. But I have a full page of notes. Communication was key to your project, health and safety of everyone involved. The PPE, I can only imagine especially during COVID times, taking care of the collections management, your condition reports. Wow, that was an enormous project. So, if anyone we do have just a few minutes before the end of our session concludes and we get on to the closing of the conference today. If there is one question, how did you start to estimate the time taken for the collection move? Was it scale based on number of people available and their available hours?
I can probably take this one. So essentially, our initial time taken, like that we estimated that it would take to move, was actually almost the opposite. We didn't get a chance to necessarily estimate. It was sort of given to us based off the construction deadlines. And then what we did after that was made decisions around basically increasing as much staff as we could get our hands on, kind of getting a sense of how many artifacts we think we could process in a day and basing that off of our collection estimates. And then that's when we started estimating how long we think we would take and can we do it in that time. And of course, as you saw, things changed really frequently and we had to keep changing our processes in order just to accommodate that deadline and ensure that we made it on time.
Yeah, and another thing that I would mention on that too is once we joined the project, we were able to talk really on a daily basis with the PAMA team to see where our resources could best be allocated to help to improve the packing stage of the project. So that's one piece of advice I would give, is if you can be kind of flexible and creative with where resources are allocated to help fill in gaps when needed, because to a certain extent some of this stuff is you can't predict it in completion in advance. So you have to be willing to be flexible and just be communicative and creative with how you're allocating resources and time.
Okay, there's two more questions. The next one is, looking back, are there any suggestions you would share that could have limited the amount of waste that had been created by the packing practices during the outgoing packing?
Just, I think what they're asking is maybe the materials that we had to throw out because they were mold impacted. I believe that's maybe the direction the question is going. Emily's nodding her head, so I'm going to take that as validation. So yeah, essentially we knew anything that was porous, that was in direct contact, essentially was non-negotiable. So what we tried to do, that's where the totes came in, the polyethylene totes. And that's where we tried to use any materials that basically could be washed again to reduce as much waste as possible. And that's really all you can do in a situation like this. You kind of have to accept that just some materials just won't make it back, and they're a one-time use.
And on the tail end of things, we did, not only were we able to see that through where, we now have stacks of filled clean totes with artifacts and unused totes now that will go back to PAMA, as Andrea mentioned, for potential reuse or sale. But when we had more time on this end to repack the items, we were able to be a bit more strategic with the nesting, just because we had more time. So we could be a little bit more thoughtful about quantity of materials. So we were able to kind of reduce overall packing materials on the return end. So it wasn't 2 times the amount throughout the whole project. So we kind of tried to do our best to even things out on both sides.
Yes, and we also, one last thing is we also tried to have everything was basically recyclable. So we recycled everything we could wherever possible, any kind of pieces left over from cutting something, or so everything was reused as much as possible. We used every little piece, and then we recycled, what was just sort of our sacrifices. And yeah, as Emily said, was more as resourceful as we could be.
Well, thank you. The last question is, if, knock on wood, you had to start this project over again, is there anything you would do differently?
I'm going to say no, but not because I don't wish things happen differently. It's more because I think the things that I wish would happen differently, such as having more time, was completely out of our control. And I know that's where one of my suggestions too in the lessons learned, like if you haven't done a full wall-to-wall inventory in a long time, any emergency you could come across, whether it be mold, fire, flood, it's really good to know have physical control of your collection and know what you're working with. That's one thing I wish we could change, but sort of out of our control at the time. So I think overall I'm quite pleased with what we did in the time that we had, but obviously if we had more time, we definitely would have done things differently.
Yeah, just to come off of that as well, I think like if I think of the different stages of the project that maybe there was a challenge, there were many, or a shift, none of them, I don't think I would have changed the outcome of any of them. And the key reason for that is, again, emphasizing that communication aspect, like especially when we're working at a distance. We're handling the collection in a facility where it's not usually handled. And so my advice again would just be to make sure you're just in constant communication. I think sometimes there might be a hesitation with external contractors to try to, handle everything internally and let the client know everything's going great. And the project has gone very well, but I think that is because we've just been so open on both sides. And Pam has been really accommodating in answering, small questions, huge questions. So just flexibility and communication on both sides has like prevented, I think, in a way, like wanting to reflect and be like, oh, I wish we had talked about that so we could have done something differently, because I think we always talked about it.
Yeah, transparency is key when you're dealing with these things, because if people don't know what they're getting themselves into, they can't be prepared and make the best choices. And that's something that I think we were very open and transparent from the beginning on both sides. And we worked through that and really talked about our resources and our skill sets and made sure that we were aligning the project so that we can meet those deadlines in the best way we could. Yeah.
Well, thank you both, Andrea and Emily. That was a fantastic presentation. And on behalf of the Ontario Museum, we are at the time to close off this session. So thank you for joining us. If you are attending the closing ceremony, we ask that you actually go to the conference portal to access the Zoom link for the closing ceremony. Thank you again, everyone, and thanks for joining us.